Les Spellman, welcome back to the Pacey Performance Podcast. As always, it's an absolute pleasure.
I love being on these. Like this is my favorite place, man. It's your voice. It's your voice. It's just gets me. That's what it is.
Not many people say that, Les.
It's your voice. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Before we get into the meat of the conversation, have a little chat about your background and things like that, I'm super excited. And I've said this to you before, but I'll say it to you again. Super excited to get you over to the UK in March, on March 25th, March 26th, for the Sportsmith Speed Conference, which is already getting tickets sold. So it's already going down a dream, getting you over, Alex Natera, Ryan Grubbs, Jonas Dodu, etc., etc. So really excited to meet you in person, because there's not many times that I get a chance to actually meet podcast guests in person. So really excited to get you over.
I'm excited too, man. I feel humbled to be with those guys. I'm actually excited just to go to listen, and I got a free ticket to go, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. It'd be a pleasure to have you. Right, mate. So a little bit of background. I know you've been on before and we've gone through it, but a brief, if there's any updates on your side, the cap says that there is a little bit of an update, so I'd like to get some info on that. Yeah. Over to you, mate.
Yeah, so I won't go through the whole thing. Like on the other podcast, I basically talked about how I had a life-threatening car accident that left me with a metal leg, which led me down an entire path of discovery, of learning how to running Division I, and then eventually becoming a coach. And I kind of walked into coaching by accident because I really wanted to become an Olympic athlete, and I got cut from the program, and I got asked to come coach with that same program. And the whole time I'm thinking I'm going back to playing, and I ended up just beginning up my career. So I started in the Olympic space, made no money, slept on dirty mattresses. And basically I was like, I got to find a way to make some money. And I got into NFL combine training, NFL offseason training. And really that's what gave me, kind of launched my more professional career, where I was making money and coaching at a higher level. So I started developing systems, had some success. Past couple of years, we've had about 50% of the top 3 picks go in the NFL draft, and some of the best performances at the NFL draft. They come out with this thing, they rank facilities, which I think is whatever, but we always aim to be in the top in something called the relative athletic score, which is just a total score of athleticism from the combine. Now, some of that's you're going to recruit guys that are good. Some of that's there, but we know kind of where guys start and where they finish. So yeah, it's been something I poured my heart into. So just recently, this past year, we signed an exclusive deal with Vayner Sports. And if you're listening, you don't know who Vayner, the last name Vayner is. It's short for Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk is an incredible entrepreneur. He's one of the early investors into Facebook and Instagram and Uber. They took the first Uber ride, Venmo, those types of things. And I was obsessed with Gary Vaynerchuk podcast. And sorry, Pacey isn't the only one I listen to. I hate to admit it.
It's so good. You went all quiet then. I love it. Carry on.
I hate to admit it. But yeah, so I started listening to Gary, and I was obsessed with just his model of how he did media and how he portrayed things. He would go into depth about, filming as much as you can, repurposing it across multiple platforms, using Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, everything. And I basically adopted his model. And then Drew came on, and Drew was all about his model as well. And we implemented the strategy, and it helped our business a ton. So it was a goal of ours to have some type of Vayner connection. And we finally got that to happen. And now we work with Vayner, not exclusively completely, but for combine training, pretty much exclusively, outside of a few quarterbacks. So it's a relationship that's really important to me, and it's been pretty cool.
So go on, mate, carry on.
No. I was just gonna say, and I'm a dad of a 2-year-old now, so I'm a little bit more stressed out than the last time we spoke.
Mate, I'm in the thick of it. I've mentioned it a few times. I've got an 18-month-old, so it's we'll chat about that in March, no doubt. But so Vayner Sports have got who represent athletes, and those athletes come to you.
Yeah. Okay. So
nice.
Last year we had with Vayner, there was 2 guys in the top 5, two guys in the top 10, in the NFL draft. But last year I had 40 I think I had 40 guys, and I had 18 drafted. It was insane. Like, no. While that was really cool and really good, it was hard. And I was like, you know what? Like, there's 20 different agents that I'm speaking to every week. So when they offered like an exclusive, I was like, cool. Like, it simplifies my life. I'm a dad, trying to spend more time at home, and I really like what they're building because I like what they're offering the athletes, and it's more than just sports. So yeah, it's been cool.
Nice. I think we could do a podcast on the business side because I'd love to pick your brain about the way you do things. But we'll leave that for another time. We'll leave that for March after the conference. But so the combine prep. Talk to us about the program. I mean, I always I'm happy to show my naivety when it comes to the combine and American football. So I'm happy to be definitely schooled here. Talk to us about the program, what it looks like, how you're putting it together, the amount of athletes, how you're managing those. I'd love to get a bit of an insight.
Yeah, well, I'll give some context first. So essentially what happens is guys finish their college football season either late December or early January. So like we had 2 guys that played in the national championship, which means they don't finish until January 9. So after they finish, they sign with an agent, and then that agent basically pays for their housing, their food, their medical, their training, a stipend, a car, like everything they need until the NFL draft. And then what happens is that agent, after they sign the guy, will typically call me and say, hey, I have a guy that wants to come train with you. And then they show up like 2 days later. So the process in the past was like 20, 30 different agents calling, and that would kind of be logistically a nightmare. Whereas this year it's just one. But essentially what happens is once they sign, they come in, we go through medical. Most guys are beat up. Most guys are coming from a grueling season. Most guys haven't like fully sprint or fully done anything like crazy athletic outside of playing a game. Because, you know, the last couple of games of the season are grind. Like you're tapping into your reservoir or whatever you built, you know, in the off season at that point. So we go through medical. Once they're cleared, green, yellow, red, green, full, yellow, partial, and typically partial will be like plan B type exercises, plan B type things, or red, like they can't actually go on the field. Then we'll go through our assessments. So our first assessment that we do is force plate. We use Hawkin Dynamics. We'll go through CMJ and a rebound jump. Our second test is Alex Natera's isometric test, which has been like insane for us. Like,
so which test is it, Les?
The ankle, knee, and the hip iso test. Man, I'm like, it took me a while to get through the course because Alex is so smart. I just feel like I'm taking all these notes and I still don't get it. But
Mate, wonder how I feel.
Yeah, yeah. But in reality, it's actually relatively simple. So that's where we start. Now, I used to write these like crazy programs before every guy got there, but now I have 10 guys. Actually, no, I have 11 guys. So it's actually relatively easy after that medical, the Hawkin jumps and the force plate in the force test, like the ISO test, to then start looking at, okay, what are we actually looking at for programming? Now I have a shell. I have an idea when it comes down to how much volume I'm going to push each week. What's the intensity? What are the fly zones for velocities? Like how much time I'm going to spend on starts, all that. Like I know that stuff, but when it comes down to the meat and the potatoes of the program, it's really from those first couple of days where we dive in. Now, how deep do you want me to go on that one question? Because I can.
Yeah, no. I've got a couple of follow-up questions if that's all right.
Perfect.
And that'll probably lead us down a few tracks. The ISO, because you was so enthusiastic about the ankle, knee, hip ISO tests. Talk to us about what that tells you and how that informs step 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, so I just got force plates this year. So I knew about force plates because working with schools and interpreting some of the data, but first it's like night and day difference in terms of being able to. Oh, my lights went off.
Talk about night and day.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. How did it? There we go. Yeah, it's night and day difference. Looking at like a number of things, but with the force plates, we're able to do the ISO test on the ankle, knee, and the hip. So the first thing that tells us is which of those three is either underperforming or is becoming more dominant to make up for a weakness somewhere else. So we know that the force is distributed from the hip, or really the power starts at the hip and then distributed to the ground through the ankle, and then knee will take a lot of that at full support. So we're seeing just like, what are some running styles that are happening as a result of weaknesses that show up in these tests? I would say like me coaching 5 years ago was like all this technical stuff and like me talking a lot. And I burnt out because, well, number one, I didn't have good performances. Well, I would say 5 years ago I did. 6 years ago. 5 years ago, I started to be like, well, I'm talking too much and maybe I should just stop talking. And I had better performances. So I'm like, there's something to it. But now I'm looking at it from the physical lens first, is what physical buckets may not be filled and how can I identify those? So that the Alex Natera ISO tests allow me a lens into that and seeing like, okay, we know they run crazy and weird, but is it showing up on this test? And if it is, well, let's improve that quality for that athlete. And that's what it allowed us to do relatively quickly, even before we tested them or had them run a 40 or anything like that. So it's been super helpful.
You're setting me right up here because the third cohort of the course launches on the 1st of February. I didn't even prep you for that. So thank you for that. Yeah. We've got some additional course content from other people as well. So that's going live. But I'm so happy to hear that you went through it and it's guided some of your assessments. But how long? I think one thing that may put people off, especially when you're doing ankle, knee, and hip. I know you only got 10 guys when previously that might have been 20, 30, 40. How long is the process to put the guys through them 3 assessments?
6 minutes. Like because we didn't do them all at once. Like weight room, A1 is like hang high pull, A2 ankle ISO test. Next day, you know what I mean? Like it was just part of the training, because like essentially like we never really made it like, hey, we're testing. It's just like, hey, do this real quick, like dive in, push hard. No, it wasn't hard enough. Okay, come back next round, we'll push harder. Like it just became a part of the training block. And like the other thing that's important to know this year is like I volunteered to be the assistant strength coach in the combine program, because every year I kind of was on the field, and then I went and I spent the rest of the day in the lab looking at video. And I'm not doing that this year. Like I'm gonna dive in and I'm gonna be a part of it all. So I'm in charge of the ISO programs and also CC. So we either do it before to potentiate, or we did it a part of the training block, and it worked fine. No, the problem, obviously, the limiting factor is if you have one force plate, or if you things like that. But the thing is that we realize is like you can still do the training. Like you could still do the training, and everything you do training from a training perspective is going to help them improve. So even if you didn't have the force plate and you just had them push and you looked at it, or you just had them do the training, like they're going to improve a ton. But having the force plate numbers is like massive. Like I'll send it to you. The asymmetries, left and right. Like when I tested myself, this is the craziest thing, is like I have a metal femur, so hip to knee. When I did my knee test on my left side, it was producing 50% less forces than my right side. Now I trained for the past 3 weeks. It's now down to 25% imbalance. And I'm like, how is that possible? I've been working on my left side for years, never implemented isometrics. All of a sudden, boom, it's back. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how fast it works.
Can we have a hypothetical athlete, just to finish this kind of little section on the ISOs? So if excuse me. So if you were testing them and you have benchmarks that you've established with your guys, and someone was clearly down on the hip, for example, how would you attack that? Just so people can kind of get into your mind with how you look at those numbers and then kind of what comes after.
Yeah, like to be honest, like we kind of attack like with all the guys, we kind of all do the same training. Like there's not much difference. Like we still have our ankle, knee, and hip blocks throughout the week. Like we'll do ankle and knee on Monday. We'll do hip on Thursday. what we do is on Saturday, it's our individual day, we'll just double up on the weakness. So we'll come back and we'll pick one ISO for that Saturday because we're moving fast. We have a lot to do. So if a guy's poor in the hip, we just hit hip again. If he's poor in the ankle, we hit ankle again. We just find the limiting factor and then hit it one more time. That's the way we've seen it work the best, just because individualizing, even with 10 guys, is tough. But the main thing is we said we have one guy, for example, he's super poor on the knee ISO. And he had an imbalance. Now, when he ran, he's got very poor stiffness. Like, he compresses like a spring. So he hits the ground, he compresses. Like, his body drops. It literally, you see the sinking action. So we improved his knee ISO by about 8%, and his contact times improved. His speeds improved. He was running with a taller hip. So, like, those are the types of case studies that we've been able to capture with the ISOs.
So in Spellman Performance, who's taking the gym side of things? Who's taking the weight room side that you are assisting in now?
Yeah, so Taylor Ramsey, he's worked with everyone from Aaron Donald. Like, he's the man. He's just not like active on social media. We should have him on here. He's
Absolutely.
a VBT, like, he's unbelievable with the VBT side of things. So, like, I've been diving in, learning more about the VBT and its effect on our guys running. It's been huge.
So why did you think it was so important for you to have that input as an assistant strength coach in the weight room? How has that affected how you go about things on the field?
Yeah, like, so it really happened when I was working with rugby, because basically the way we were set up at the Olympic Training Center was like the weight room was so far removed from the field that a lot of the field stuff I did made me not be in the weight room. So, like, it just kept missing time. And I was like, man, like, I don't know what's going on in there. But as I developed as a coach, I just got more and more comfortable in field-based stuff, and I was in the weight room less and less and less. And then, I obviously bought a gym and started going through that stuff, and I was doing both for a while. And then when I came up to Sports Academy, it was actually Mamba at the time. It was kind of the same scenario where I was removed from the weight room. So then I was just like, I feel more confident in this space, and like, I know what I'm doing, and I just trust other people to do their thing. And I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. But over the years, what happened is like so much developed in the weight room from when I had been in the weight room that I felt really far behind, and I felt like I wasn't even able or adequate. Like, I couldn't be the weight room guy if I wanted to at this point. Like, not at a high level at least. And I hadn't dived into the VBT side. I hadn't dived into the force plates. I hadn't dived into like the new things that were happening. So I wanted to just learn. So I put myself through it, and I wanted to see. But what I'm starting to realize, and what I'm starting to do more of, obviously I knew this, but we're starting to see like what physical buckets can we fill, and then how does that affect some of the technical things that show up. So very James Wild, like, where I would read James's stuff and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I don't need to do 1,000 drills. Some of these physical things will be cleaned up. Some of these technical things will be cleaned up with some physical bucket, physical buckets, like, the use of eccentrics, the use of VBT, the use of ISOs, like finding out like where can I get the biggest bang for the buck. But the second thing is just like also from a cultural standpoint. So imagine like if I'm with, all these draft picks and I only come to the field, I don't come see them in the weight room. I don't see where some of them might be strong, some of them might be confident in the weight room. I might see another side of them that I can pull and draw on when I'm coaching them. It's like, hey, remember that movement we did in the weight room? I want you to feel like that, right? I want you to, you know what I mean? So we started to really look at those things and see, like, even look at our accessories, like where could we replace that accessory with the ISO, or where could we add something in, or where can we put like, oh my God, I'm gonna ramble about this, but here I go.
Go for it.
We ended up splitting our speed session into 2 sessions in a day. Now it sounds crazy, but it's actually not, because it's the same amount of time. So if I take a 90-minute session, like what I was doing is like, why it was 90 minutes is because I run my mouth. I start talking, and when I talk, I like interfere and I mess things up. And then when I mess them up, I'm like, oh, I got to bring them back, So that process takes 30 minutes or so. So what I started to do is I started looking at my acceleration session. What is my goal of acceleration? Is I want to be able to project the body. I want to be able to switch. I want to be able to hit the ground really hard and aggressively climb in speed. Now, I need to be able to have them execute this skill without me. So the first session of the day on Monday is an acceleration session that's like basically resisted runs. It starts, it's a couple time sprints, it's a couple of jumps, a couple of med ball throws, and then we're done, 60 minutes. Take a break, we go to the film room, then I run my mouth. I'm like, okay, I can talk here. So I go through and everybody takes notes. Here's the goal for the day that we talked about. Here's where you're at. Okay, we need to improve. Now, after that film session, we go back on the field. And on that field session, we do a technical session. But what the way that I do is we do some starts, because obviously the starts are really important for the 40. So do some starts, get out. But then I have something called force, power, and velocity blocks. So my force block, I'm going to do all those technical things that I was trying to get them to do, like banded one-step repeats, or like the banded sled drives with the hip drive, or a med ball throw to start, like things that are like, yeah, the intensity might climb moderately, but it's nowhere near as high as like what I had them do in the morning, which might have been 20s or 30s, or if it could be chain sprints or 1080 sprints. Like it could be those things that are really physical capacity, but the force block is really technical capacities based around producing forces at the start. And when I break that up, that 90 minutes became separated by 60 and 30, and then I go right to the weight room. I had a much better transfer of the skill than I did if I was just had one 90-minute block. So yeah, it's been huge for us.
Interesting. So you've gone through some examples of the force, one of the three. What does the power and the velocity, what do them buckets look like? So
the power, and it's very similar. I drew a lot of inspiration from Jonas and Ryan on their projection, switching, and reactivity. So I think the power is more of like, just think of it as like the middle of the run. So after the start and climbing to velocity, what qualities do you need? So I might have bounding in there. I might have resisted bounding. I might have repeat hops, like a triple broad jump in there. So that they're qualities that require you to produce power. It's not as reactive. It's not like a depth drop to a jump or anything like that, but it's qualities that require like a moderate contact time. It's repeat, rebound type things. And then in that session, we do a little bit of starts, but we'll actually carry the start out longer. So we'll do like a 7-step acceleration versus a 4-step acceleration. Or we'll do transition stuff, working on the torso in that power block. Now, the velocity block is very reactive. It's all contact time. So on that one, we might do like the box switches. We might do reactive hops, reactive pogos, depth drop to a jump, to depth drop to a hurdle jump, single leg reactive stuff. Like that becomes like a very like velocity dominant block of time. So when we split them like that, like I don't have to spend all that time teaching in the morning. It's just get the output and then go. Now there are times like the first 2 weeks we did have 90-minute sessions. It you know what I mean? As we go into phase 2, we start splitting and we start really seeing those qualities improve over time.
I know you've pre-answered this question already, but on the individualization side of things, even with 10 or 11 guys, how much is different in them, the force, power, and velocity type stuff that you've just explained?
Yeah, so actually phase 2 is everyone's the same. Like we train speed Monday, Thursday, Saturday. Everybody does the same. But what happens is after phase 2, we'll actually go, you'll have one force block, you'll have one velocity block, and then the power block is either going to be force or velocity dominant. So like you could do your force stuff on Monday, your velocity stuff Thursday. When you get to Saturday, because you're also doing your individual ISOs, you might have more like force-based or start potentiation type stuff, or you might have more like velocity potentiation type stuff. And it's the same, weight room kind of follows the same trend. We have certain athletes that need to work more or the velocity side, more of the velocity-based power, and there's guys that are still getting stronger and working on the force-based side. So it all follows the same trend and same style when we get into the phase 3.
Again, just hitting on a point that you made about James's stuff, James Wild's stuff, about the technical issues cleaned up with the physical stuff. Can you give us any examples there that you've maybe seen out there on the field where that happens?
Yeah, a huge one. I'd say the biggest one that I usually see get cleaned up relatively quickly is like hip extension. Or if you want to get technical, like hip extension velocity. So like how fast does that hip extend and how powerful? Or you could say hip projection. So most football athletes have poor hip projection in the first couple steps, meaning like they don't displace themselves forward. Like they don't get forward. They like to spin really fast. Like they're cycling their legs really fast at the start, and they don't go anywhere. It's like 4 steps and 4 yards. Now, when we do the ISOs on, especially the hip ISO, like or sometimes we do a lunge ISO, like very what's that guy's name? Adam Archuleta's Jay Schroeder.
Okay,
yeah, like where he did like the long, like we actually love that ISO. We don't do it 5 minutes or anything, but doing some long extended ISOs, it cleans it up relatively quickly. And what we've noticed is that guys are getting very, very, very good projection from cleaning up that physical quality, doing the ISOs or doing some weight room work. Because a lot of them, like, they actually have the strength, but they never felt that. And being able to get them in that position where they're producing force a little bit longer than they're used to, like, it's been incredibly helpful. So that's one thing that cleans up. Another thing, we mentioned the knee, on the stiffness side. Like, my biggest thing this year is looking at how much hip negative displacement they have. So, like, does their hip drop in max velocity? And how do I fix that? Because that's a huge limiting factor to running extremely high velocities. And most football players do not have good stiffness. And really because, like, number one, they're wearing pads all the time, 12 pounds. They're running on soft surfaces. And they very rarely will build up to high speeds. Like versus track, you're running on a hard surface in spikes. You're running full efforts multiple times a week. Like, you don't get that in football. So when they come to us and we're putting them in that environment where it's very fast, very high hip, it's difficult. The ISOs clean it up a lot. So it allows them to have a higher hip because when they attack the ground, they have less depression of the knee, less decompression, and they can carry a higher hip throughout. So, like, we've been looking at all the reports, and week 1 versus week 3, we're seeing a higher hip in max velocity during that contact phase. Another one, I was going to say one, and here I am saying
keep going.
But yeah, the ankle ISO, it's been huge. This is crazy. This is the advertisement for the ISO course.
Keep it going.
I didn't mean it. I didn't mean for it to be that, but it's been super helpful. So ankle is huge. A lot of the guys tape their ankles in college football, so they don't have very good plantar flexion or dorsiflexion. So when they get into the positions like where they're trying to attack with a stiff ankle, they struggle. And they also struggle, and this is more Randy Huntington type stuff, like on the push off with the aggressive push off. And I was listening to a Randy Huntington podcast, like, and if you don't know Randy Huntington, he trained Sue in China. He trained him, which is amazing, from like a 10-3, 10-4 to a 9 whatever. I don't know what it is, but Sue has probably the fastest frequency of all time. Like, he can spin really fast. Not great step length or anything, but he's also 5'6" and a Chinese sprinter. So, but Randy always talked about the plantar flexion velocity at toe off, and I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, but when we did the ISOs, I noticed the guy's ability to increase I don't know how, but it worked, right? So the contact times got faster as we're going. The contact times got more consistent as we're going, and then we saw less depression at the ankle. Like we were seeing a lot of guys hit the ground and just their ankle would just collapse and their foot would just collapse, versus now they're hitting at a better position and they can manage that isometric. Because really, when you hit the ground, the ankle is locked in that position while your hip and knee move over it, And if your ankle doesn't have the ability to withstand those forces, it's going to drop. And it's going to dissipate power. So like using Alex Natera's measure of like 2.6 times body weight, like if the ankle can't produce 2.6 times the body weight on that test, we're looking at guys and looking at their contact times and saying, well, it checks out when we do this. And as it improved, the contact times improved. Don't know the science behind it, so don't ask me, but it worked. And that's all I cared about, when I'm going through it. So
how are you doing those assessments? Are you using video or just video, or are you using other tools as well?
Yeah, we use Jonas's ViewMotion, actually, his system of SpeedWorks. And like we typically did it by hand. Like I used to use Canovia for a while. I'm just giving out free advertising today. but yeah, we use Jonas's, and it's been great. Honestly, it's saved me a lot of time as a coach and made me a better dad because I'm at home, and I'm not looking at video reports all day. So I think you can use it however you want to use it. Like I have my own way of looking at things. I think every coach does, and a lot of coaches are a little afraid to like use someone else's system. But Jonas and I have always been good friends, and so we use that. So that gives us everything we needed, and we just pump that into a dashboard, and we're able to see the ISO test versus the kinematic stuff. It's been awesome. So
exciting. I was speaking to him the other day actually, and he was telling me about the kind of vision for it and whatnot, and it sounds super exciting.
It's super great. Exciting. Yeah, it's really cool because a lot of people in this industry almost get offended like when guys come up with stuff, and it's like our industry is very slow. The speed world, not necessarily the strength. I don't know. I couldn't speak for the strength, but the speed world is very slow to adopt things, and everyone's skeptical versus like being like, hey, like let me try it and let me give you some feedback and help you grow it, so I can go grow my thing and hit you up and be like, what do you think? And reach across the pond, and guys need to do that more. So that's what Jonas and I have always done. So it's been great.
No, I agree. The more that can happen, the better. Absolutely. So the stuff that we've been talking about for the last half hour is probably, at least from my perspective, something that you're well known for in terms of the combine prep. But something you're going to talk about in Leeds when you come over in March is creating a year-round speed system. Probably, and again, this is only my perspective, probably something that you're less known for, but I'm excited to hear more about it. So just to start to kick us off, when you've got an athlete for longer period of time, unlike you're dealing with now, what's your overall philosophy? How do you think about that process? And then we'll dive into, again, assessments, program, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, I struggled with this and actually avoided making long-term plans just because of how difficult it can be. And as I told you, my first real job was in rugby and rugby sevens, and rugby seven seasons are crazy. It's hard. You're playing all over the world for 9 months, and training for rugby, you have to be good at everything: speed, power, strength, endurance. And I was making annual plans and things would fall through. And it was, looking back, it was like very inflexible planning and very difficult for me to actually implement. It was very unrealistic. Let's put it that way. And when I got into the private world, I never had anybody more than like 6 weeks, and it was fun. It was like, oh, this is easy. Like shotgun approach, like throw things at them. That stuck. Okay, cool. Like easy. And just recently I got back into more long-term planning. It's like working with Arizona, a couple other schools. And I had to come up with a process for how I identified, what our goals were for the year. So mainly what I really look at is if I were to split the year up, football is very easy. Like you have an in-season, you have an off-season, you have a spring season, you have preseason, you have these phases. So like my biggest thing is like if we're developing speed, at what phase do we want to work with an athlete developing weaknesses versus strengths? It's the hardest thing to think about. It's like, do I really want to, if I'm in preseason, do I really want to start attacking this athlete's weakness? Probably not. But if I'm in early off season, do I want to just have them work on their strengths? Well, you can, but if I'm trying to make year-to-year progress, like imagine taking a freshman to senior, like how can I make this a multi-year process of developing this athlete? And if you look at all freshmen, is probably have very similar patterns, similar qualities, similar mistakes. Like how can I improve that year to year? So what I came up with was just like just strengths and weaknesses. Like when do I work on that? So what we do is we target the weakness in the early part of the off season, and what we're trying to do is identify both physically and technically where the athlete needs to improve. So it's just like the James Wild thing. Is it a physical thing or is it a technical thing? And what things can be cleaned up? So that's early off season. Now, when we get to like late off season, we like to do a mix. So there's some of the weaknesses we're improving, but we're also bringing in some of the strengths. So like whatever they're good at, we're allowing them to be good at that. Now, when you get to some of the later parts of the off season or even preseason, we like to maintain some of the work on the weakness, but most of it is just keeping them confident, keeping them healthy, really working on the strengths. And then we just maintain throughout the season. So what a lot of people think about is like the old periodization model where you condition in the beginning, then you do strength, and then you do power, and then you do speed. So very similar to Charlie Francis, like the linear periodization model. You keep everything in there at all times, just at different qualities, like different quantities, sorry. So when I get in season, I don't just abandon the speed side. So what we were able to do with Arizona this year is we were able to get 33 new top speeds in season. 33 with a 35% reduction in games lost and 35% reduction in games lost from injury and 35% reduction in time lost from injury, with no time lost for hamstrings. So what was happening was, if I look at the trend of the games over the course of the season, players are actually continuing to get faster. Now, they're not getting faster at the same rate as early off season when they're working on their weakness and they finally click and they finally get faster, right? But they are actually faster than they were in the early off season, which is crazy to think about. So what we notice is that an athlete's ability to hit a top speed isn't a quality that's lost over the course of the season, but the athlete's ability to hit that top speed within the same time frame is lost, which is more of an acceleration-based thing. So what we focused on is maintaining the acceleration-based quality, so the ability for that athlete to accelerate to that same speed in the same amount of time throughout the season. And we did that with resisted runs and targeted resisted runs. So our approach is pretty simple, is you maintain the resisted runs and you surf the curve. So you go from heavy, medium, and light at different time periods. And then you allow practice to be fast. You allow practice to have the high velocities. Now, just to give a context, Tyler Owens and John Shaw are some of the best coaches I've ever even encountered. I learned more from them than they could have ever learned from me. So like a lot of this was them buying into the process of making sure that practices were fast, making sure that guys hit top speeds in games, making sure that guys did the resisted work and the 1080 work and the technical work and all that. But what we realize is that we're getting the peak outputs in game, which is what you want. You want to play fast. Like you leave the game, you won, and you realize, oh, well, we also hit new top speeds. Like this is positive. So we're creating an environment where players are allowed to play fast, where they're not coming into the game where they're cooked. But the resisted running, now most coaches are like, well, you don't want to do that because then it might pull back from their velocity qualities. But we're microdosing it. We're only doing 2 to 4 reps in a session. But just that minimal dosage was allowing the athletes to maintain that ability to be very aggressive on their acceleration and have a lot of power. And then practices started to become faster. So there was times in practice where, hey, like, yeah, run this route, catch the ball, but give me an acceleration after, or try to hit a new top speed, and became a culture of guys wanting to run fast. And Arizona became a place where guys wanted to actually run fast. And same with TCU. Like we had the podcast with Kyle Bolton, who's one of my best friends, and always talking back and forth about who's faster. I'm clearly faster than Kyle Bolton, if you guys were wondering, but and our teams are faster. But anyway, like they created at TCU, they created a culture of guys running fast, and strategically placing it within the practice environment where the game and the actual system should allow players to run fast in practice. It shouldn't just be a volume based. There should be adequate rest periods. There should be spacing that's, all back to Fergus Connolly and Cam Joss. I don't know if you've read those 4 books they put out, but those 4 books should be worth $1 million because they lay it out where if you want to practice fast, make the field big enough, wide enough, whatever, reduce the amount of players to allow players to hit top speeds. And you start to get those outputs in game. You don't have to always artificially, expose players to top speeds. Now you can, if they don't in practice, okay, go and do it. But what we saw was like guys were hitting those speeds in practice, 90, 95%, 98% of their top speed. Okay, cool. Check, box checked. And when you have a coach like Jed Fish and you have a coach like TCU coach like that buy in that, let's play fast, and it makes it very easy. It was awesome.
Would you say that the introduction and the continuation of the resisted sprints, surfing the curve, like you said about with the resisted sprints, was the bigger or the biggest key to keeping guys healthy, as well as hitting those top speeds?
Yeah, I think yes, 100%. So I think creating an environment for players to run fast. You can't run fast if you're not healthy. Like non-healthy guys don't just go run fast. So if I know you're healthy enough to run fast, then you're probably healthy enough. So if guys can do that consistently and you create an environment around that, both before, after you have the right protocols to keep guys healthy, you're going to keep guys running fast. You're going to keep them healthy. I think the resisted sprints were something that helped them stay robust throughout the season, because they're getting to those top speeds in a safe way. They're accelerating the top speeds. They're not trying to force themselves into top speeds that they're not accustomed to. There are things that, like Kyle talked about on the podcast, like running hot. Like when I was a kid growing up, I could go from playing football in the street to basketball to scraping my knee to riding my bike to running around, racing my friends. I don't think I ever warmed up though. I was running hot. My nervous system was active and ready. And as an adult, you get more sedentary. You kind of take your time through things. You don't feel it. So when you're running hot, when you're consistently allowing players to be exposed to high intensity efforts, high magnitude accelerations, high speed runs, it allows those players to feel like I'm comfortable doing this. Like I can turn it up a couple notches. Like I can play at that speed, and they have the freedom to do it. So I think that was a major. Now the thing that I didn't mention is that strength staff is unbelievable, and the medical staff is unbelievable. Head coach is unbelievable. You have to have a perfect mix. It's not just like, sprint and injuries will reduce. Now, you might take away 2 hamstring injuries, but if your training is stupid and you're doing dumb stuff, you're gonna say this stuff doesn't work. But it's a cultural shift to speed that needs to happen. And when I say speed, I'm saying the highest central nervous system thing you could do. Like sprinting is the highest output for our nervous system. Like it's fast. As fast as we can move is through sprinting. So it does help the rest of the qualities in your body. But you can't do that without support of like amazing staff.
Cool. Right. Just a bit of a contrast to the assessment process that you outlined for us when it comes to the combine prep. How does the assessment process look when you've got a little bit longer, when you've got that year, that whatever it is to work with a group of athletes? I know you're going to go through this in Leeds, but I'd like to get a bit of a teaser.
Yeah, not too different, to be honest. It's just the combine one is just you do the assessment stuff and then you attack it fast. Whereas the other one, it's like, okay, that's great, but we're not going to work on that right now. We'll work on it later. But like always, force velocity profiling, it's not as I would say aggressive as a term as it was like on Twitter a couple weeks.
It was aggressive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fun, man. I was ready to get some gloves out, but it's definitely it's definitely a good tool. So we still use it. And now like 1080 has an amazing feature where you could just hit a button and it like formulates your force velocity profile. And it's a good thing to refer back to if a guy gets injured. Here's your original profile, or like, hey, we need to nudge you in this direction. So that's a good tool. So load velocity profiling is second. It's good to find out like what are the target loads that we're going to use for these athletes. Like same way you do in the weight room. Everybody doesn't do 315 on bench. Some guys do lighter, some guys do heavy, right? It's simple concepts that people took way out of proportion. But load velocity profiling, ISO test, if we can, are always great. Force plate jumps. I've been diving into a lot more on the force plate side, and I'm not comfortable talking about it because I'm very amateur. but no, it's been great to look at how like the signature that we see on the force plate and the rebound jump. It's been really good on that side. And then the technical profile. So we have them run right now. We're using V motion. Have them run through a 20 meter run. Pretty much gives us what we need. If we can, we'll do a max velocity run as well. But we'll look at everything from hip projection distance to touchdown distance to thigh range of motion to torso. I mean, I could spend a whole podcast on it. Does it matter? Not always. So I try to look for the big things. Like Jonas uses projection, switching, reactivity. I use a little bit different. He's a little bit different at times, but everything kind of comes back. He's not wrong. It comes back to those three things. Like, can you get distance? Can you project? Can you switch really fast? And when you hit the ground, is it an effective ground contact? Now, there's things that can influence that. Like maybe your torso is too low. Like it's funny because a lot of our NFL guys, you're like, oh, they probably fly up and start running. No, they all try to throw their head to the ground. Like they try to go too low. So, okay, cool. Like, let's find out how to progressively rise it. I always have a Frisbee analogy. If I throw a Frisbee flat, it'll drop early. But if I throw it a little bit up, it'll slice forward and then come up. All right. So how do we influence those things? So it's not too different. It's really not too different at all. It depends on what we attack where. So we know that we're gonna actually attack some technical things like far out from the season. It's like, yeah, we can attack those things. We can have more technical work. But as we get close, it has to be more physical work, and it has to be more specific work, and it has to be more geared towards what they're naturally inclined and good at to really make those things pop. But earlier off season, we will attack technical.
We've got a little under 10 minutes to go, and I want to make sure that I mention some of the work that you did with the US men's national team, because I wasn't aware until I think someone put it on social media that you'd been involved with those guys. And given the physical outputs that have been shared everywhere when it comes to that squad during the World Cup, I'd love to get a bit of an insight into the work that you were doing with them in that kind of in that prep period.
Yeah. Well, first it's Darcy Norman and Jordan Webb deserve most of the credit because all of the credit, because they created an environment where they challenged a lot of the norms in soccer, which is hard because soccer is a very aerobic culture where they love to do long runs and timed runs and heart rate zones. It's a very aggressive aerobic culture worldwide. It's also a sport that's a very technical culture where they love doing technical work. They love practicing with the ball, doing everything with the ball. Like I remember watching soccer teams in college, like do conditioning with the ball, that's what it is. So it's very technical, and you have a lot of big egos in soccer as well, because the bigger the money in the sport, the bigger the ego. Like, look at the NFL. Like there's times where, you realize you're not going to win a conversation. You could just say, hey, this, the sky is this color. And you're like, nope, it's not. It's completely different. It's not, it's black. It's not blue. And, so they were able to penetrate that culture and make a massive change in that culture by emphasizing physical qualities. So the qualities that we're looking at is the ability to maximally accelerate from a start, but also from a jog or from a run and being able to reaccelerate. They looked at max velocity sprinting. So a lot of the hamstring type injuries were happening when players were asked to maximally, hit a velocity. So how can we mitigate some of that? And then also looking at deceleration, we did a lot of deceleration work. So if you look at the game of soccer, there's high speed decelerations. And I know something Damian Harper talks about a lot. And in soccer, you have a lot of 180 turns as well. Like the ball changes direction and it's a fast 180 turn, or keeping up with a player. So you have a lot of these movements that aren't necessarily physical skills or qualities that teams work on. And Darcy, his history being, overseas, being at Roma, and like implementing this structure from the youth academy all the way to the senior academy, he had a ton of experience, and he's not afraid to challenge the norm. Actually, I got to text Darcy. He's supposed to come in here in like an hour. So.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Give him my regards, because we had dinner in Rome when I was on holiday in Rome, and nice. he was at Roma. So yeah, he's an absolute legend. Great. So give him my regards.
Great, amazing dude. So basically, Darcy contacted me after I'd worked with Katerina Macario, and Katerina is a superstar soccer player that unfortunately recently tore her ACL. She'll bounce back. She'll be good, but she's a phenomenal player. And he's like, hey, I just want to come hang out for a couple of days and watch Katerina train. I was like, done. So while he was there with her, he's like, what tests do you do? And I was like, well, most of what I'm doing with her is helping her improve her acceleration. I know she can hit 20 miles per hour, but how she gets there is ineffective. So I'm really working on the early part of her acceleration and making that her dominant skill set so that she can accelerate hard, in any direction at any time, but also decelerate, change directions. He's like, love it. How do you do it? So he already knew what he wanted. He really knew what he wanted from me, or who I was lucky to be there at the right time. But the goal was to help athletes accelerate better. That's what it started with. So everybody got a force velocity profile. Everybody got a load velocity profile on the 1080. And then we were able to really bucket guys into what quality we wanted to push. Everyone in the soccer world knows that soccer guys aren't like big gym guys necessarily. Like you don't see soccer players just hanging out at LA Fitness doing curls and stuff. Like you just don't see it. Like it's not a culture based on that. So we realized that we could get those force-based qualities out of heavy resisted running, and guys liked it because it's a couple runs, it's on the field, you're in your soccer boots, it's in right after a warm-up. Like you can get big outputs from the guys doing heavy resisted running, medium resisted running, light resisted running, and improve these qualities and improve their ability to accelerate to high speeds. Now, a lot of these guys were hitting high speeds in trainings, so there wasn't always a need to go hit a new top speed. Very infrequently, but using stat sports and using GPS, like Darcy was able to say, like, okay, these three players need to just run to the 50 and hit a high speed. But most of the work was really based around being able to accelerate early or accelerate late or accelerate from a jog or accelerate from a run. Wasn't much technical. And then that bled into the deceleration conversation and really just taking Damian's articles and sending it to Darcy. It's like, yeah, look at the early and late phase and build a structure around it. And so I think we had buy-in because it's simple, it was effective, and it's easy to implement resisted running. Even if you didn't have a load velocity profile, just go heavy. Like heavy is heavy, light is light, medium is medium. And the outputs in the game, like I don't know how much credit like any of us can take because the players are, they're going to be in a heightened state at the World Cup, but they were effective accelerating, they were effective decelerating, they were physical, they had the qualities, they were fit, and they won unwinnable games. So like, what else can you say,
Brilliant. Good work. Right, mate, I'm going to let you go because no doubt you've got an incredible busy day with back-to-back stuff going on. And I'm probably just one in the line of plenty of things going on. So I'm going to let you go. But I really appreciate you giving us an insight into some of the combine stuff and US men's national team, which is super exciting, especially me as a Brit and watching all those games and whatnot.
Yeah,
But
sorry about that loss that you guys had against us. It's called soccer now. It's no longer
Yeah,
football.
of course it is. Of course it is. No, right. I'm going to let you go, but look forward to meeting you in person in Leeds. And anyone that wants to get more information on that, it's on the website, and we can link to that as well, of course. But thanks again, Les. Always a pleasure to chat. And,
thank you.
No, my pleasure. Look forward to speaking to you in person in
Sounds
March.
good. Appreciate it. Talk soon.
Speak soon, buddy.